God's laws. The 10 Commandments. Commandment 1. You shall have no other gods before me. Commandment 2. You shall not make for yourself an idol or worship any image. Commandment 3. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Commandment 4. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Commandment 5. Honor your father and your mother. Commandment 6. You shall not murder. Commandment 7. You shall not commit adultery. Commandment 8. You shall not steal. Commandment 9. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. Commandment 10. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, wife, or possessions. God's laws, 11 through 613. 11. You shall be fruitful and multiply. 12. You shall circumcise every male on the 8th day. 13. You shall not eat the sciatic nerve. 14. You shall free a Hebrew slave after 6 years. 15. You shall redeem a Hebrew maidservant. 16. You shall not sell a Hebrew maidservant to foreigners. 17. You shall betroth a Hebrew maidservant to master or son. 18. You shall pay damages for killing a slave. 19. You shall pay damages for causing miscarriage. 20. You shall apply eye for eye justice. 21. You shall pay damages for ox goring a person. 22. You shall pay damages for livestock harm. 23. You shall restore stolen property or pay restitution. 24. You shall pay damages for grazing another's field. 25. You shall pay damages for fire spreading. 26. You shall pay restitution for theft from entrusted goods. 27. You shall pay damages for loss of entrusted animals. 28. You shall pay restitution for borrowed items damaged. 29. You shall compensate for seducing an unbetrothed virgin. 30. You shall not allow a sorceress to live. 31. You shall not commit bestiality. 32. You shall not sacrifice to other gods. 33. You shall not oppress a foreigner. 34. You shall not mistreat widows or orphans. 35. You shall not charge interest to the poor. 36. You shall return a pledged garment before sunset. 37. You shall not curse God. 38. You shall not curse rulers. 39. You shall offer firstborn sons and animals to God. 40. You shall not eat meat torn by wild animals. 41. You shall not spread false reports. 42. You shall not follow a crowd to do evil. 43. You shall not show favoritism in judgment. 44. You shall return a neighbor's stray livestock. 45. You shall help a neighbor's struggling animal. 46. You shall not pervert justice for the poor. 47. You shall not make false charges. 48. You shall not accept bribes. 49. You shall let fields lie fallow every 7th year. 50. You shall rest on the 7th day Sabbath. 51. You shall not invoke other gods. 52. You shall celebrate 3 annual festivals. 53. You shall not offer leavened bread with sacrifices. 54. You shall not let sacrificial fat remain until morning. 55. You shall bring the best firstfruits to God's house. 56. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. 57. You shall appoint judges to administer justice. 58. You shall consecrate priests as instructed. 59. You shall have priests wear sacred garments. 60. You shall sanctify priests through offerings and anointing. 61. You shall offer daily sacrifices on the altar. 62. You shall build the tabernacle as God directs. 63. You shall not ascend the altar by steps. 64. You shall keep the altar pure from uncleanness. 65. You shall pay a half-shekel ransom for each person. 66. You shall have priests wash hands and feet before serving. 67. You shall anoint sacred objects with holy oil. 68. You shall offer incense on the golden altar daily. 69. You shall not offer unauthorized incense. 70. You shall conduct a census only as God directs. 71. You shall not neglect the Levites' portion. 72. You shall observe Passover with unleavened bread. 73. You shall eat unleavened bread during Passover. 74. You shall not possess leaven during Passover. 75. You shall offer the Passover sacrifice at the appointed time. 76. You shall not leave Passover sacrifice until morning. 77. You shall not break bones of the Passover lamb. 78. You shall have circumcised males eat the Passover. 79. You shall not allow foreigners to eat the Passover. 80. You shall celebrate the feast of unleavened bread. 81. You shall redeem firstborn donkeys with a lamb. 82. You shall redeem firstborn sons. 83. You shall not eat leavened bread during Passover. 84. You shall teach children about the Exodus. 85. You shall wear phylacteries on head and arm. 86. You shall dedicate firstborn animals to God. 87. You shall not work on first and seventh days of Passover. 88. You shall not work on the feast of Pentecost. 89. You shall not work on the feast of tabernacles. 90. You shall observe the Sabbath with no work. 91. You shall not kindle a fire on the Sabbath. 92. You shall punish Sabbath violators with death. 93. You shall make holy garments for priests. 94. You shall not eat sacrifices outside the sanctuary. 95. You shall have priests eat certain offerings. 96. You shall not offer sacrifices with leaven. 97. You shall not leave sacrificial offerings until morning. 98. You shall bring firstfruits to the sanctuary. 99. You shall not make covenants with idol-worshipping nations. 100. You shall not intermarry with idol worshippers. 101. You shall offer burnt offerings correctly. 102. You shall offer grain offerings without leaven. 103. You shall offer peace offerings properly. 104. You shall offer sin offerings for unintentional sins. 105. You shall offer guilt offerings for specific sins. 106. You shall not eat sacrificial fat. 107. You shall not eat blood. 108. You shall have priests receive portions of peace offerings. 109. You shall not leave sin offerings until morning. 110. You shall have priests keep the altar fire burning. 111. You shall offer grain offerings with salt. 112. You shall not omit salt from grain offerings. 113. You shall not eat sin or guilt offerings outside the sanctuary. 114. You shall have priests inspect animals for blemishes. 115. You shall not offer blemished animals. 116. You shall not slaughter a mother and young on the same day. 117. You shall not profane God's name through offerings. 118. You shall sanctify the name of God. 119. You shall not desecrate God's holy things. 120. You shall observe the feast of weeks Pentecost. 121. You shall leave field corners for the poor. 122. You shall leave gleanings for the poor. 123. You shall not steal crops. 124. You shall not lie. 125. You shall not swear falsely by God's name. 126. You shall not oppress your neighbor. 127. You shall not withhold wages overnight. 128. You shall not curse the deaf. 129. You shall not put a stumbling block before the blind. 130. You shall judge justly without partiality. 131. You shall not slander. 132. You shall not stand idly by when a life is in danger. 133. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. 134. You shall rebuke a sinning neighbor. 135. You shall not take vengeance. 136. You shall not bear a grudge. 137. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. 138. You shall not mix different kinds of livestock. 139. You shall not sow fields with mixed seeds. 140. You shall not wear garments of mixed fabrics. 141. You shall compensate for relations with a betrothed slave. 142. You shall let fruit trees mature 5 years before eating fruit. 143. You shall not eat fruit from trees in the first 3 years. 144. You shall sanctify the 4th year's fruit. 145. You shall not practice divination or sorcery. 146. You shall not eat meat with blood in it. 147. You shall not cut hair at the sides of the head. 148. You shall not trim the edges of beards. 149. You shall not tattoo the body. 150. You shall not cut the body for the dead. 151. You shall not make your daughter a prostitute. 152. You shall revere God's sanctuary. 153. You shall keep the Sabbath. 154. You shall not consult mediums or spiritists. 155. You shall honor the elderly. 156. You shall not oppress foreigners in your land. 157. You shall use honest weights and measures. 158. You shall not curse parents. 159. You shall punish adultery with death. 160. You shall punish sexual relations with a father's wife. 161. You shall punish sexual relations with a daughter-in-law. 162. You shall punish homosexual acts. 163. You shall punish sexual relations with a mother and daughter. 164. You shall punish bestiality. 165. You shall not approach a menstruating woman for relations. 166. You shall not have relations with a sister. 167. You shall not have relations with an aunt. 168. You shall not have relations with a brother's wife. 169. You shall not follow the practices of pagan nations. 170. You shall distinguish between clean and unclean animals. 171. You shall punish those who consult mediums. 172. You shall have priests not defile themselves with the dead. 173. You shall have high priests not uncover their heads or tear clothes. 174. You shall have high priests marry a virgin. 175. You shall punish priests' daughters who become prostitutes. 176. You shall have priests not serve with physical defects. 177. You shall have priests be ritually clean to offer sacrifices. 178. You shall have only priests' households eat holy offerings. 179. You shall not eat holy offerings if unclean. 180. You shall make restitution for eating holy offerings unintentionally. 181. You shall offer unblemished animals for sacrifices. 182. You shall not castrate animals. 183. You shall not offer animals sacrificed outside the sanctuary. 184. You shall not eat unclean animals. 185. You shall not eat creeping things. 186. You shall not eat birds of prey. 187. You shall not eat swarming insects. 188. You shall become clean after touching unclean animals. 189. You shall purify after touching a human corpse. 190. You shall observe laws of ritual impurity from bodily discharges. 191. You shall purify women after childbirth. 192. You shall offer sacrifices for cleansing after childbirth. 193. You shall have priests diagnose skin diseases. 194. You shall purify those with skin diseases. 195. You shall offer sacrifices for cleansing from skin diseases. 196. You shall purify houses with mildew. 197. You shall observe the Day of Atonement. 198. You shall offer sacrifices on the Day of Atonement. 199. You shall not work on the Day of Atonement. 200. You shall celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. 201. You shall dwell in booths during tabernacles. 202. You shall not work on the 1st and 8th days of tabernacles. 203. You shall offer additional sacrifices on festival days. 204. You shall sound the trumpet on the Feast of Trumpets. 205. You shall not work on the Feast of Trumpets. 206. You shall observe the year of Jubilee every 50 years. 207. You shall return land to original owners in the Jubilee. 208. You shall redeem land before the Jubilee if possible. 209. You shall not sell land permanently. 210. You shall cancel debts in the 7th year. 211. You shall rest the land in the 7th year. 212. You shall redeem property sold due to poverty. 213. You shall not oppress a poor Hebrew servant. 214. You shall redeem a Hebrew servant sold to a foreigner. 215. You shall not enslave Hebrews permanently. 216. You shall send unclean people outside the camp. 217. You shall make restitution for wrongs plus 1/5. 218. You shall perform the test for suspected adultery. 219. You shall have Nazarites abstain from wine. 220. You shall have Nazarites not cut their hair. 221. You shall have Nazarites not approach a corpse. 222. You shall have Nazarites offer sacrifices at vow's end. 223. You shall have priests bless the people. 224. You shall have Levites serve from age 25 to 50. 225. You shall purify Levites for service. 226. You shall offer the Passover in the 1st month. 227. You shall allow a second Passover for the unclean or absent. 228. You shall not break bones of the second Passover lamb. 229. You shall not leave the second Passover offering until morning. 230. You shall punish those who neglect the Passover. 231. You shall have foreigners follow Passover laws if participating. 232. You shall set up the tabernacle according to God's plan. 233. You shall sound trumpets for assemblies and alarms. 234. You shall appoint leaders over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. 235. You shall not eat unclean birds. 236. You shall not complain against God's provision. 237. You shall quarantine those with skin diseases. 238. You shall not rebel against God's appointed leaders. 239. You shall not offer unauthorized fire. 240. You shall have priests not drink wine before serving. 241. You shall have Levites receive tithes for service. 242. You shall tithe the tithe to priests. 243. You shall not neglect the Levites' tithe. 244. You shall offer redemption for firstborn sons. 245. You shall redeem firstborn unclean animals. 246. You shall not eat firstborn clean animals. 247. You shall have priests receive portions of offerings. 248. You shall not approach the sanctuary without authority. 249. You shall guard the sanctuary from unauthorized entry. 250. You shall not profane holy gifts. 251. You shall offer the red heifer for purification. 252. You shall use red heifer ashes for cleansing. 253. You shall purify after touching a corpse. 254. You shall not defile the sanctuary with uncleanness. 255. You shall not eat while unclean from a corpse. 256. You shall purify with water of cleansing on the 3rd and 7th days. 257. You shall not neglect purification rites. 258. You shall not defile the land with uncleanness. 259. You shall not murmur against God's leaders. 260. You shall not engage in idolatry like Baal Peor. 261. You shall punish idolaters with death. 262. You shall not spare those who lead to idolatry. 263. You shall not make peace with Amalekites. 264. You shall take a census of fighting men. 265. You shall divide land by lot according to tribes. 266. You shall not defile inheritance through intertribal marriage. 267. You shall appoint a successor for leadership. 268. You shall offer daily morning and evening sacrifices. 269. You shall offer additional Sabbath sacrifices. 270. You shall offer new moon sacrifices. 271. You shall offer Passover additional sacrifices. 272. You shall offer Feast of Weeks additional sacrifices. 273. You shall offer Feast of Trumpets additional sacrifices. 274. You shall offer Day of Atonement additional sacrifices. 275. You shall offer Feast of Tabernacles additional sacrifices. 276. You shall offer 8th Day of Tabernacles sacrifices. 277. You shall not vow rashly. 278. You shall honor vows made to God. 279. You shall annul a wife's vow if her husband objects. 280. You shall annul a daughter's vow if her father objects. 281. You shall have widows and divorcees honor their vows. 282. You shall not break a vow. 283. You shall wage war only as God directs. 284. You shall divide war spoils fairly. 285. You shall purify after battle. 286. You shall not take spoils without purification. 287. You shall allocate land west of Jordan. 288. You shall not abandon fellow tribes in conquest. 289. You shall build cities of refuge for unintentional killers. 290. You shall not accept ransom for murderers. 291. You shall not accept ransom for fleeing to refuge cities. 292. You shall punish murderers with death. 293. You shall require 2 witnesses for capital punishment. 294. You shall not pity murderers in judgment. 295. You shall not pollute the land with blood guilt. 296. You shall establish boundaries for Levitical cities. 297. You shall not diminish Levites' pasture lands. 298. You shall not alter tribal land inheritance. 299. You shall marry within tribe to preserve inheritance. 300. You shall not add to or subtract from the commandments. 301. You shall teach the commandments to children. 302. You shall not forget the covenant at Sinai. 303. You shall not make idols or images. 304. You shall not worship the sun, moon, or stars. 305. You shall gather the people to hear the law every 7th year. 306. You shall write a Torah scroll for the king. 307. You shall have the king read the Torah daily. 308. You shall not appoint a foreign king. 309. You shall have the king not have too many horses. 310. You shall have the king not have too many wives. 311. You shall have the king not have too much silver and gold. 312. You shall appoint judges in every city. 313. You shall not appoint unjust judges. 314. You shall not pervert justice. 315. You shall not show partiality in judgment. 316. You shall not accept bribes. 317. You shall pursue justice only. 318. You shall not plant trees near the altar. 319. You shall not set up sacred pillars. 320. You shall not offer blemished sacrifices. 321. You shall punish idolaters with death. 322. You shall require 2 witnesses for capital cases. 323. You shall bring difficult cases to the central court. 324. You shall obey the decisions of the central court. 325. You shall not deviate from the court's ruling. 326. You shall not rebel against the priests or judges. 327. You shall appoint a priest to teach the law. 328. You shall not fear to execute justice. 329. You shall not covet another's property. 330. You shall not desire another's wife. 331. You shall not testify falsely. 332. You shall not murder. 333. You shall not commit adultery. 334. You shall not kidnap. 335. You shall not steal. 336. You shall honor parents. 337. You shall keep the Sabbath. 338. You shall not misuse God's name. 339. You shall not worship idols. 340. You shall have no other gods. 341. You shall love God with all your heart, soul, and might. 342. You shall teach children to love God. 343. You shall bind the commandments on hand and forehead. 344. You shall place the commandments on doorposts mezuzah. 345. You shall not test God. 346. You shall not follow other gods. 347. You shall fear God and serve him only. 348. You shall destroy idols and their places. 349. You shall not desire idolaters' property. 350. You shall not make idols of gold or silver. 351. You shall not intermarry with the 7 Canaanite nations. 352. You shall not show mercy to idolaters. 353. You shall not make treaties with the 7 nations. 354. You shall destroy the 7 Canaanite nations. 355. You shall not forget Amalek's attack. 356. You shall blot out the memory of Amalek. 357. You shall not fear enemies in battle. 358. You shall recount God's miracles to children. 359. You shall not eat chametz on Passover. 360. You shall eat matzah on Passover. 361. You shall not leave chametz in possession during Passover. 362. You shall celebrate Passover in the chosen place. 363. You shall offer the Passover sacrifice in the evening. 364. You shall not offer Passover outside the chosen place. 365. You shall eat the Passover sacrifice at the chosen place. 366. You shall not work on the first day of Passover. 367. You shall count 7 weeks to the Feast of Weeks. 368. You shall celebrate the Feast of Weeks. 369. You shall rejoice before God at the 3 festivals. 370. You shall not appear empty-handed at festivals. 371. You shall celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. 372. You shall rejoice at the Feast of Tabernacles. 373. You shall not work on the first day of Tabernacles. 374. You shall not work on the 8th day of Tabernacles. 375. You shall offer sacrifices at the chosen place. 376. You shall not offer sacrifices anywhere else. 377. You shall bring all offerings to the chosen place. 378. You shall not eat tithes outside the chosen place. 379. You shall eat meat only at the chosen place. 380. You shall not eat blood. 381. You shall pour blood on the ground. 382. You shall not eat the second tithe outside the chosen place. 383. You shall eat the second tithe before God. 384. You shall not neglect the Levite. 385. You shall not eat firstborn animals outside the chosen place. 386. You shall bring firstborn animals to the chosen place. 387. You shall not eat chametz after noon on Passover Eve. 388. You shall remove chametz before Passover. 389. You shall not abandon the Levite. 390. You shall set aside the second tithe every 3rd year for the poor. 391. You shall cancel debts every 7th year. 392. You shall not demand repayment in the 7th year. 393. You shall lend to the poor generously. 394. You shall not harden your heart against the poor. 395. You shall give charity willingly. 396. You shall not send a freed slave away empty-handed. 397. You shall mark a freed slave with an awl if he chooses to stay. 398. You shall not muzzle an ox while threshing. 399. You shall perform Yibam Levirate marriage for a childless widow. 400. You shall perform Halitzah if refusing Levirate marriage. 401. You shall not pity the pursuer in self-defense. 402. You shall cut off the hand of a woman who grabs genitals in a fight. 403. You shall use honest weights and measures. 404. You shall not use dishonest weights. 405. You shall remember what Amalek did. 406. You shall destroy Amalek completely. 407. You shall not forget Amalek's attack. 408. You shall not leave a corpse hanging overnight. 409. You shall return lost property. 4:10. You shall not ignore lost property. 4:11. You shall help unload a neighbor's burdened animal. 4:12. You shall not cross-dress. 4:13. You shall not take a mother bird with her young. 4:14. You shall release the mother bird if taking eggs. 4:15. You shall build a parapet on your roof. 4:16. You shall not sow vineyards with mixed seeds. 4:17. You shall not plow with ox and donkey together. 4:18. You shall not wear wool and linen mixed. 4:19. You shall wear fringes on garments. 4:20. You shall punish false witnesses with their intended penalty. 4:21. You shall not pity false witnesses. 4:22. You shall not fear enemies in war. 4:23. You shall offer peace before attacking a city. 4:24. You shall destroy a condemned city completely. 4:25. You shall not rebuild a condemned city. 4:26. You shall not benefit from a condemned city's spoils. 4:27. You shall not allow a sorcerer to live. 4:28. You shall not practice divination. 4:29. You shall not practice soothsaying. 4:30. You shall not practice enchantment. 4:31. You shall not consult mediums. 4:32. You shall not consult spiritists. 4:33. You shall not seek the dead. 4:34. You shall listen to true prophets. 4:35. You shall not prophesy falsely. 4:36. You shall punish false prophets with death. 4:37. You shall not fear executing a false prophet. 4:38. You shall set aside cities of refuge. 4:39. You shall prepare roads to cities of refuge. 4:40. You shall not move a neighbor's boundary stone. 4:41. You shall not testify with fewer than 2 witnesses. 4:42. You shall not accept a single witness. 4:43. You shall not kill an unintentional manslayer. 4:44. You shall add 3 more cities of refuge if needed. 4:45. You shall not pity a murderer. 4:46. You shall remove blood guilt from Israel. 4:47. You shall not distort justice. 4:48. You shall not pervert justice for foreigners or orphans. 4:49. You shall leave forgotten sheaves for the poor. 4:50. You shall not return for forgotten sheaves. 4:51. You shall leave fallen grapes for the poor. 4:52. You shall not return for fallen grapes. 4:53. You shall leave olive gleanings for the poor. 4:54. You shall not return for olive gleanings. 4:55. You shall not strip a vineyard bare. 4:56. You shall leave grape gleanings for the poor. 4:57. You shall not muzzle an ox while threshing. 4:58. You shall not delay fulfillment of vows. 4:59. You shall fulfill vows promptly. 4:60. You shall allow a worker to eat from the field. 4:61. You shall not take more than needed from a field. 4:62. You shall not put a sickle to a neighbor's standing grain. 4:63. You shall divorce with a written bill. 4:64. You shall not remarry a divorced wife after her second marriage. 4:65. You shall allow a newlywed exemption from war for 1 year. 4:66. You shall not take millstones as pledge. 4:67. You shall not kidnap. 4:68. You shall punish kidnappers with death. 4:69. You shall observe laws of skin diseases carefully. 4:70. You shall not demand pledge from the poor. 4:71. You shall return a poor man's pledge by sunset. 4:72. You shall not oppress a hired worker. 4:73. You shall pay a worker on the same day. 4:74. You shall not take advantage of the vulnerable. 4:75. You shall not take a widow's garment as pledge. 4:76. You shall leave produce for the poor. 4:77. You shall not punish children for parents' sins. 4:78. You shall not pervert justice for strangers or orphans. 4:79. You shall not take a widow's garment as pledge. 480. You shall not beat a worker excessively. 481. You shall limit lashes to 40. 482. You shall not add to the lashes. 483. You shall not delay justice. 484. You shall not withhold food from an ox. 485. You shall perform levirate marriage. 486. You shall not refuse levirate marriage without halitza. 487. You shall not strike a man in the genitals. 488. You shall punish the woman who grabs genitals. 489. You shall not have dishonest weights. 490. You shall use accurate weights. 491. You shall remember Amalek's attack. 492. You shall blot out Amalek's memory. 493. You shall not forget Amalek. 494. You shall bring firstfruits to the sanctuary. 495. You shall declare the firstfruits offering. 496. You shall set aside tithes annually. 497. You shall declare the tithe before God. 498. You shall not eat tithes while in mourning. 499. You shall not eat tithes while unclean. 500. You shall not give tithes to the dead. 501. You shall follow all commandments faithfully. 502. You shall build the chosen sanctuary. 503. You shall not destroy holy objects. 504. You shall worship only at the chosen place. 505. You shall not offer sacrifices elsewhere. 506. You shall bring all vows to the sanctuary. 507. You shall not eat consecrated meat casually. 508. You shall not forsake the Levites. 509. You shall not add to the Torah. 510. You shall not subtract from the Torah. 511. You shall not listen to false prophets. 512. You shall punish false prophets. 513. You shall not entice others to idolatry. 514. You shall punish enticers to idolatry. 515. You shall investigate idolatry thoroughly. 516. You shall destroy idolatrous cities. 517. You shall not rebuild idolatrous cities. 518. You shall not benefit from idolatrous spoils. 519. You shall not make cuts in flesh for the dead. 520. You shall not shave the head for the dead. 521. You shall not eat abominable creatures. 522. You shall eat only clean animals. 523. You shall not eat animals that died naturally. 524. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. 525. You shall set aside the tithe of produce. 526. You shall eat the tithe in the chosen place. 527. You shall redeem the tithe with money if far. 528. You shall use tithe money for food in the chosen place. 529. You shall not neglect the Levite in tithes. 530. You shall set aside the poor tithe every third year. 531. You shall cancel debts in the sabbatical year. 532. You shall not refuse loans near the sabbatical year. 533. You shall lend to the needy. 534. You shall not send a freed slave empty-handed. 535. You shall give generously to freed slaves. 536. You shall dedicate firstborn males to God. 537. You shall not work firstborn animals. 538. You shall not shear firstborn sheep. 539. You shall eat firstborn animals in the chosen place. 540. You shall not redeem firstborn clean animals. 541. You shall not eat blemished firstborn animals. 542. You shall sacrifice blemished firstborn locally. 543. You shall not sacrifice blemished animals. 544. You shall not eat chametz on Passover. 545. You shall eat matzah on Passover. 546. You shall remove chametz before Passover. 547. You shall celebrate Passover at the chosen place. 548. You shall offer the Passover in the evening. 549. You shall not work on Passover's first day. 550. You shall count the Omer to Shavuot. 551. You shall celebrate Shavuot. 552. You shall rejoice at the 3 festivals. 553. You shall include the Levite in festivals. 554. You shall not appear empty-handed at festivals. 555. You shall celebrate Sukkot. 556. You shall rejoice at Sukkot. 557. You shall dwell in booths during Sukkot. 558. You shall not work on Sukkot's first day. 559. You shall not work on Shemini Atzeret. 560. You shall appoint judges and officers. 561. You shall not plant trees near the altar. 562. You shall not erect sacred pillars. 563. You shall not appoint a king who is not Israelite. 564. You shall have the king not multiply horses. 565. You shall have the king not multiply wives. 566. You shall have the king not multiply wealth. 567. You shall have the king write a Torah scroll. 568. You shall have the king read the Torah. 569. You shall not rebel against the court. 570. You shall obey the priests and judges. 571. You shall not deviate from the court's ruling. 572. You shall not fear executing justice. 573. You shall not covet. 574. You shall not desire another's property. 575. You shall not testify falsely. 576. You shall not murder. 577. You shall not commit adultery. 578. You shall not steal. 579. You shall honor parents. 580. You shall keep the Sabbath. 581. You shall not misuse God's name. 582. You shall not worship idols. 583. You shall have no other gods. 584. You shall love God fully. 585. You shall teach children God's laws. 586. You shall bind commandments on hand and forehead. 587. You shall place commandments on doorposts. 588. You shall not test God. 589. You shall not follow other gods. 590. You shall fear and serve God only. 591. You shall destroy idols. 592. You shall not desire idolaters' property. 593. You shall not make gold or silver idols. 594. You shall not intermarry with Canaanites. 595. You shall not show mercy to idolaters. 596. You shall not make treaties with Canaanites. 597. You shall destroy the 7 nations. 598. You shall not forget Amalek. 599. You shall blot out Amalek. 600. You shall not fear enemies. 601. You shall recount miracles to children. 602. You shall not eat chametz after Passover Eve noon. 603. You shall remove chametz before Passover. 604. You shall not abandon the Levite. 605. You shall set aside poor tithe every 3rd year. 606. You shall cancel debts in sabbatical year. 607. You shall not demand repayment in sabbatical year. 608. You shall lend generously to the poor. 609. You shall not harden heart against poor. 610. You shall give charity willingly. 611. You shall not send freed slave empty-handed. 612. You shall mark slave who chooses to stay. 613. You shall not muzzle ox while threshing.